Married for a contract, stayed for a promise. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The city lights of Austin shimmered like liquid gold on the glass walls of Ward Enterprises as Ethan Ward stood alone in his office. The rain streaked down the window behind him, blurring the skyline that once defined his power. 34 years old, self-made millionaire, CEO of one of Texas's largest real estate firms, and yet tonight, his empire felt like sand slipping through his fingers. His father's will had one cruel condition: to secure full ownership of the company, Ethan had to marry before the end of the quarter. 3 weeks left. His jaw tightened as he stared at the unsigned document on his desk, a contract drafted by his own lawyer. Marriage, reduced to paperwork. The elevator chimed softly. Maya Tran stepped in, clutching a folder to her chest, raindrops still clinging to her dark hair. She was a temporary assistant, hired only 2 months ago, working 2 jobs to pay her father's hospital bills. She looked nervous, out of place in a world of marble floors and silent power. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Ward?" she asked, her voice careful. Ethan turned, his gaze steady but unreadable. "Yes." "Sit down." She obeyed, eyes darting to the expensive pen beside the contract. "You are punctual," he said quietly. "That is rare here." Maya tried to smile, unsure if it was a compliment. "Thank you, sir." "What is this about?" Ethan took a slow breath. "I am going to make you an offer, Miss Tran. And I need you to hear it through before you react." Her fingers tightened around the folder. "All right. Marry me," he said. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I am sorry, what?" "You heard me," Ethan said, his tone calm but cold. "Think of it as a contract. 6 months. You play the role of my wife in public. In return, your debts will be cleared, and your father's hospital bills will be paid in full." The room fell silent except for the rain against the glass. Maya's pulse raced. "This is insane. You do not even know me." "Exactly," he replied. "That is what makes it clean." He slid the papers toward her. "You need help. I need an image. It is business, not love." She stared at the contract, so many pages, so many conditions, and at the man across from her who spoke about marriage like a merger. "And what happens after 6 months?" she whispered. "We go our separate ways," Ethan said simply. "No strings, no claims, no regrets." Her throat tightened. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, "Do not lose your dignity, Maya." But dignity could not pay medical bills. Pride could not stop the eviction notice waiting on her door. She looked up. "You really think people can treat marriage like a deal?" His eyes softened, almost imperceptibly. "People like us do not always get to choose what love looks like." He stood, extending the pen. "So what will it be?" Outside, thunder rumbled over the city. Maya looked at the ink-black sky beyond the window and then at the pen in his hand. Her heart screamed no, but desperation whispered yes. With a trembling breath, she reached for it. The moment her fingers brushed the pen, Ethan said quietly, "Good. We will finalize it tomorrow." As she turned to leave, he glanced at her reflection in the glass. For the first time in years, his expression was not entirely cold. "You may regret this," he murmured. Maya paused at the door, her voice barely above a whisper. "So might you." And with that, the deal that would change both their lives began, sealed not with love, but with a signature. The next morning, the city woke beneath a soft drizzle, and Maya sat in the small hospital cafeteria staring at her reflection in a cup of cold coffee. The night replayed in her mind like a film she could not stop. Ethan Ward's voice still echoed, low and calm, as if asking someone to sign a loan, not a marriage. She traced the rim of the cup, wondering when her life had become a series of desperate bargains. Her father's doctor entered with his usual tired smile. "He is stable today, Miss Tran, but we will need to extend his treatment another month." Maya nodded, forcing a thank you. Another month meant another bill she could not pay. Outside, thunder rolled again, and she closed her eyes, whispering, "What choice do I have?" By noon, she stood once more at the glass tower of Ward Enterprises. Security escorted her to the top floor, where Ethan was waiting, already in a charcoal suit, a cup of black coffee steaming beside him. The contract lay open on his desk, her signature line still blank. He looked up. "You came back." Maya swallowed hard. "I said I would think about it." Ethan studied her for a moment. "And have you?" She met his gaze. "I have. I will do it. But I want one condition." His brow lifted slightly. "Which is?" "You will pay my father's bills directly to the hospital, not to me." "I will not touch your money." Ethan's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Agreed." He extended the pen again, and this time her hand did not tremble. The ink bled smoothly onto the page, binding two strangers in an unholy alliance called marriage. When she set the pen down, he said quietly, "The ceremony will be private. Tomorrow afternoon. My lawyer will handle everything." Maya nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Fine." As she turned to leave, Ethan added, "A driver will pick you up at 10. Dress appropriately." His tone was polite but distant, as if she were an employee, not a bride. She left the office feeling hollow. That night, at her tiny apartment, she packed what little she owned, a few clothes, her father's old photograph, and a half-wilted lily from the flower shop they once ran together. She looked around the room that had been her world and whispered, "It is just 6 months." The next day unfolded like a dream she could not wake from. A courthouse, gray and echoing, the smell of rain-soaked stone, and a judge who barely looked up as he read the vows. "Do you, Ethan Ward, take Maya Tran to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Ethan's voice was steady. "I do." "And do you, Maya Tran, take Ethan Ward to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Her voice caught once, but she forced the words out. "I do." The sound of the gavel striking wood marked the strangest moment of her life. No music, no family, no celebration, just the sound of rain and the hum of fluorescent lights. Outside, Ethan handed her a plain silver ring. "Wear it in public. Cameras love details." Maya slid it onto her finger, its chill biting her skin. "What do I call you now?" she asked quietly. "Mr. Ward?" He gave a short laugh with no warmth. "Ethan will do. But only when we are alone." A black car waited by the curb, sleek and silent. As they drove through downtown, Maya watched raindrops race across the tinted glass. The city seemed to shrink behind her, replaced by long roads and gated estates. When the car stopped before a sprawling mansion of stone and glass, her breath caught. "This is your house?" "Our house," Ethan corrected, his tone flat. Inside, everything gleamed: marble floors, tall windows, and silence heavy enough to hear her own heartbeat. A maid appeared, bowing slightly. "Welcome, Mrs. Ward." The words felt strange, almost foreign. Ethan gestured down the hall. "You will stay in the West Wing. We have separate rooms. Remember our rules: no interference, no questions, and no affection in public unless required." She met his eyes. "And what if someone asks why I married you?" His lips curved in the faintest ghost of a smile. "Tell them love is complicated." With that, he turned and disappeared into his study, the sound of his footsteps fading down the marble corridor. Alone in the grand silence, Maya stood beneath a chandelier worth more than her father's entire shop and realized she had traded her freedom for a promise she barely understood. Outside, lightning flashed across the glass, and somewhere deep in the house, a clock began to tick, counting down the 6 months that would test the line between business and love. The first morning in the Ward mansion felt unreal. Sunlight spilled through tall glass windows, touching the edge of the king-sized bed where Maya had barely slept. She sat up slowly, surrounded by silence too deep for comfort. The walls were painted white, spotless, expensive, but cold. It was not a home. It was a museum of success. She dressed modestly and followed the faint smell of coffee to the kitchen, where the housekeeper greeted her with a polite smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Ward." Mr. Ward already left for the office. The title still made her stomach twist. She nodded, murmured thanks, and sat at the marble counter, staring at the cup of coffee someone had poured for her. Across the room, framed photographs of Ethan's corporate milestones lined the wall. Not one showed him smiling. As she sipped the bitter coffee, she wondered what kind of man lived behind that perfect facade. Later that afternoon, a driver escorted her to the company headquarters for a lunch meeting with Ethan's board. Appearances matter, he had texted earlier. She wore the navy dress his stylist had delivered that morning, its tag still attached until the last minute. When she entered the restaurant, Ethan was already there, sharp in a charcoal suit, speaking quietly to 2 older executives. He looked up, his expression unreadable, but his eyes lingered for a moment longer than expected. "Maya," he said smoothly, rising to pull out her chair. "You look appropriate." Appropriate. Not beautiful, not lovely, just appropriate. She forced a polite smile. The meal was a blur of polite questions and cautious smiles. When one of the board members joked, "Ethan, we thought you would never settle down," Ethan replied easily, "It was time. She keeps me grounded." The words were simple, but the tone was warm enough to convince anyone listening. Under the table, his hand briefly touched hers, a silent reminder to play along. She did, smiling on cue, laughing softly when he teased her about her lack of golf skills. By the end of the lunch, the executives were charmed. As they left, one of them whispered to her, "He has changed since you came along." Maya smiled politely but said nothing. Once they were alone in the car, she turned to him. "You are good at pretending." Ethan stared out the window. "It is not pretending. It is strategy. For you, maybe. For me, it feels like lying." He turned his head then, eyes sharp. "Everything in my world is perception, Maya. The truth does not matter unless people believe it." She looked away, her chest tight. The drive home was silent, filled only with the hum of the tires against the road. That evening, she wandered through the mansion, pausing at a locked glass door near the staircase. Inside was a small indoor garden, neglected but still beautiful. Dust covered the leaves of white lilies that had withered long ago. When she asked the housekeeper about it, the woman hesitated. "Those were Mrs. Ward's lilies. His mother's. He has not allowed anyone to touch them since she passed." Maya's throat tightened. Later, she found Ethan standing in the study, pouring whiskey into a crystal glass. "You never told me about your mother," she said quietly. He did not look at her. "There is nothing to tell. The lilies in the glass room say otherwise." His hand stilled for a second. "Leave them alone. You keep everything else perfect, but you let that part die." "Why?" He turned sharply, eyes storm dark. "Because not everything deserves to be fixed." The words hung between them like a blade. Maya took a slow breath. "Maybe not. But sometimes, leaving things broken hurts more." Without waiting for his answer, she turned and walked away. The next morning, sunlight poured through the glass again, falling across the lilies that somehow looked a little less dead. Maya had opened the door and watered them before dawn. She did not know if he would notice. She only knew that something inside her refused to let beauty die in silence. And somewhere in the mansion, Ethan watched the security footage in silence, his expression unreadable, as the girl he married for convenience knelt among the lilies, breathing life back into what he thought was lost forever. Days turned into weeks, and the silence of the Ward mansion began to soften. The lilies in the glass room had bloomed again, white and delicate, filling the air with a faint sweetness that seemed to linger in every hallway. Maya started spending her mornings there, trimming the leaves, humming softly as sunlight spilled across her hands. The staff began to smile more when they saw her, as if the house itself was breathing again. One morning, Ethan came downstairs earlier than usual, buttoning his cufflinks while speaking on his phone. When he noticed her arranging flowers in a vase by the window, his steps slowed. "You did this," he said, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. "They were dead." She looked up, surprised. They were waiting for someone to care. He did not answer, only studied her for a moment before walking away. Later that day, a stylist arrived at the house with boxes of dresses and shoes. Maya frowned. "What is this?" The woman smiled professionally. "Mr. Ward asked me to prepare you for the Carter Foundation Gala this Friday. It will be your first public appearance as his wife." That evening, when Ethan came home, she confronted him. "You could have told me." "I am telling you now," he said evenly, setting his briefcase on the counter. "The gala is important. Appearances matter. You really care what they think." He met her eyes. "I care about what keeps my company alive." She folded her arms. "And what am I in this story? A trophy?" His jaw tightened. "You are my wife. Pretend if you must, but play the part well." She wanted to argue, but his tone left no space for it. The night of the gala arrived under a sky thick with stars. The mansion buzzed with quiet preparation, black cars waiting in the driveway, photographers already gathering at the hotel across town. When Maya stepped out of her room, the air seemed to hold its breath. The navy gown fit her like it was made of moonlight, her hair swept into a simple twist that revealed the curve of her neck. Ethan stood at the bottom of the staircase, dressed in a tailored tuxedo, and for the first time, his eyes betrayed something almost human. "You clean up well," he said softly. "You too," she replied. The ride to the event was quiet, filled only with the hum of tires and the flicker of city lights. As they entered the grand ballroom, flashes of cameras painted them in light. Ethan's hand rested at the small of her back, steady and protective. Reporters called out questions, but he guided her through the crowd with practiced ease. During dinner, Maya smiled and answered politely when spoken to, just as he had instructed. But when a journalist at their table asked, "Mrs. Ward, do you believe love and business can ever mix?" she paused, feeling every eye turn toward her. Ethan glanced at her, expecting a safe answer. Instead, she said clearly, "Business builds empires. Love builds people. The lucky ones find a way to have both." The table went silent for a heartbeat, then applause rippled softly from nearby guests. Ethan looked at her with surprise that almost resembled pride. When the orchestra began to play, he leaned in. "You handled that better than I expected." "You underestimate me," she said. "I do that to everyone," he replied with a faint smirk. Later, as they stood on the terrace overlooking the city, he handed her a glass of champagne. "You made them believe we are real." "And what about you?" she asked. He hesitated, watching the skyline. "I am still deciding." She looked at him, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. "Maybe it is not something you decide. Maybe it is something that just happens." Ethan said nothing. But when a gust of wind lifted the edge of her hair, he reached out instinctively, tucking it behind her ear. For a moment, neither spoke. Somewhere inside the ballroom, a camera flash went off, capturing the image of two people who were supposed to be pretending, but whose hearts were starting to forget the difference. The following week, the headlines from the Carter Foundation Gala spread across every major news outlet. Pictures of Ethan and Maya smiling together appeared under captions that read, "The power couple everyone is talking about." For the first time since their arrangement began, Ethan seemed almost relaxed at work. His board was satisfied, investors were confident, and the company's stock began to rise again. Yet something about Maya lingered in his thoughts more than any of that success. He found himself glancing at the clock during meetings, wondering if she had eaten lunch, or whether she was still tending to the lilies at home. One evening, when he arrived earlier than usual, he found her in the garden, wearing jeans and a paint-stained t-shirt, restoring the faded benches by hand. "You should let the staff handle that," he said, standing in the doorway. "They do not need to." "I like fixing things," she replied without looking up. "Even things that are not broken?" "Especially those," she said softly. Ethan stood watching her for a moment, the scent of lilies drifting in the air. "You are different from everyone I have met," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "That is probably because everyone you meet works for you." He chuckled under his breath, a sound that startled them both. Fair point. For a few weeks, their interactions softened into something that felt almost normal. They shared dinner occasionally, laughed at the news, and sometimes walked through the garden at dusk. But behind every quiet moment, there was still an unspoken wall between them, the reminder that their marriage was not real. That illusion shattered one Friday night when Ethan received an urgent call from his assistant. The company's largest investor, Mr. Benson, wanted a private dinner with Ethan and his wife that same evening. "It is not optional," his assistant warned. "He is nervous about the merger. He needs to see stability." Ethan glanced at Maya across the table, where she was sorting bills. "Get dressed," he said. "We have dinner plans." 2 hours later, they arrived at a private restaurant downtown, all glass and candlelight. Mr. Benson greeted them warmly, but his questions were sharp. "Marriage changes a man," he said, studying Ethan. "Tell me, Mrs. Ward, how do you keep this one humble?" Maya smiled politely. "By reminding him that success means nothing if you have no one to share it with." Benson laughed and lifted his glass. "You are lucky, Ethan. She makes you look human." Ethan forced a smile, but the words stung more than they should have. When the dinner ended, Benson pulled Ethan aside. "Your wife is impressive. Keep her close. The world believes what it sees." On the drive home, silence filled the car until Maya finally said, "Does it bother you that they think you need me to seem human?" Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "They do not know me." "Maybe because you never let them," she said. He parked outside the mansion, his voice sharp. "You think you understand me after a few dinners?" She turned to him, her tone calm but firm. "No. But I think I understand pain when I see it." His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. She stepped out of the car and walked toward the house, the silver hem of her dress glinting under the porch light. Later that night, Ethan poured himself a drink in the study, her words echoing in his mind. "Pain when I see it." The next morning, Maya found a single lily placed on her breakfast tray with a handwritten note, "For the one who fixes what I cannot." She stared at the flower for a long time, unsure if it was an apology, a confession, or both. Outside, the sun climbed higher, spilling light through the glass ceiling of the once-forgotten garden, where something fragile but very real had finally begun to grow. By mid-autumn, the air around the Ward estate carried the quiet calm of change. The lilies bloomed brighter than ever, and even Ethan's stern routine began to soften. He spent less time at the office, more time at home, quietly joining Maya in the garden or helping her carry supplies to the greenhouse. It was subtle, but she noticed. The man who once spoke in orders now asked questions, and sometimes even listened. One evening, as the sun melted into gold over the horizon, Ethan walked into the kitchen and found Maya cooking. The scent of garlic and rosemary filled the air. "You cook too?" he asked, half amused. She looked over her shoulder. "Do you expect me to eat takeout every day?" He smiled slightly. "You could have asked the chef." "I like the sound of a real kitchen," she said. "It makes a house feel less like a museum." Ethan leaned against the counter, watching her move with quiet focus. "You are not afraid to speak your mind." "I promised myself I would not be invisible in this house," she replied. "Even if it is just for 6 months." His expression flickered. "Do you count the days?" Sometimes, she admitted softly. Do you? He hesitated, then said quietly, lately, yes. The sound of rain began to patter against the windows. They ate together, not as strangers but not yet as lovers. Between bites, she asked, what was your mother like? The question caught him off guard. He looked down at his glass. She was kind, he said after a pause. Too kind. My father used to say softness is a weakness. She tried to prove him wrong, but it cost her everything. Maya's voice softened. Do you think she would be proud of you? Ethan's throat tightened. I do not know. I became the man she was trying to save my father from. The silence between them grew heavy, filled only by the rain and the soft ticking of the clock. Maya reached across the table, her hand barely touching his. Then maybe it is time you save yourself. For a moment, he looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. The distance that had once felt like iron between them seemed to bend. The next day, Ethan cancelled his afternoon meetings and took Maya on a drive. He did not tell her where they were going, only that she should wear something comfortable. After an hour, they stopped at a small, weathered house on the edge of town. Its paint had faded, the porch sagged slightly, and wildflowers grew along the fence. This was where I grew up, he said quietly. Maya looked around, surprised. It is beautiful, in its own way. It was chaos, he said. But my mother loved it. She used to say broken things still deserve to be cared for. He smiled faintly, glancing at her. Sounds familiar, does it not? She laughed softly. Together they walked through the empty rooms, dust swirling in the sunlight. Ethan stopped in front of a cracked window. I plan to sell this place, he said. But maybe some things should be rebuilt instead. Maya turned toward him. You could restore it. Use it for something good. He looked at her, his voice low. Maybe you could help me design it. She blinked. Me? You once said you studied architecture before life got in the way. He smiled slightly. Consider this a chance to finish what you started. She stared at him, speechless for a moment. Ethan, why me? Because you see value where others see ruin, he said simply. The wind moved through the open doorway, carrying the faint scent of lilies even here. In that moment, something fragile shifted between them, not a confession, but an understanding. As they stood together in the quiet house that had shaped his past, Maya realized this man, who once treated love as a transaction, was finally learning how to build something that could last beyond a contract. And for the first time since the day she signed her name, she no longer wanted to count the days left. The following week brought a storm neither of them expected. News outlets began publishing whispers about Ethan's sudden change of heart and the mysterious renovation project he had started with his wife. The media called it reckless spending, a distraction, even a scandal. But the real blow came from inside the company. One morning, Ethan walked into his office to find his assistant pale-faced, holding a tablet. It is the contract, sir. Someone leaked it. Ethan's chest went cold. On the screen was the marriage agreement, every clause, every condition, every cruel reminder that their union had been born from business. By noon, the headlines exploded. CEO's marriage was a 6-month deal. Ethan Ward's love for sale. Cameras surrounded the gates of the mansion. Maya's phone flooded with messages, questions, and insults. When Ethan came home, she was already standing by the window, her eyes red from tears. Is it true? She asked quietly. Did you write this contract knowing it would destroy me if it ever came out? Ethan stepped closer. Maya, listen to me, answer me, she said, her voice trembling. Was this ever real to you? He hesitated, and that hesitation was all the answer she needed. I thought so, she whispered. She took off the silver ring and placed it on the table. You said it was business. Let us keep it that way. Before he could speak, she walked past him, her suitcase already by the door. Where will you go? he asked, his voice low. Somewhere no one knows my name. I can fix this, he said quickly, almost desperate. She turned back, tears glimmering in her eyes. That is your problem, Ethan. You think everything can be fixed with control. And then she was gone. The next days were chaos. Reporters camped outside the mansion, investors demanded answers, and Ethan's board called an emergency meeting to question his judgment. He showed up, but his mind was elsewhere in the woman who had walked out of his life with quiet dignity. Late one night, he returned to the old house they had visited together. The renovation had stopped, tools still scattered on the floor. He stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat, the smell of wet wood thick in the air. For the first time in years, he felt small. On a dusty table, he noticed a small wooden box. Inside was a note in Maya's handwriting. You cannot rebuild a house if you do not first rebuild yourself. Beneath it lay a photograph of the half-restored porch they had worked on together. He closed his eyes, his hands trembling. That was the night Ethan finally understood what she had meant. Some things are not meant to be fixed, they are meant to be felt. And in the quiet ruin of that forgotten home, he finally admitted to himself that he had fallen in love with the woman who had only ever wanted to make him whole. 2 weeks passed since Maya left, and Ethan Ward had become a ghost in his own empire. The board had voted to suspend his authority temporarily while the investigation into the contract leak continued. His mansion, once filled with quiet tension and the scent of lilies, now stood empty. Every room echoed with her absence. The only thing that remained untouched was the note she had left behind. Ethan carried it in his pocket like a wound that refused to heal. One evening, he stood before the media gathered outside his company headquarters. Cameras flashed, and microphones crowded around him. His lawyer whispered, "Stick to the statement." But for once, Ethan ignored the script. He stepped forward, his voice steady but raw. Yes, the contract was real, he began. It started as a business arrangement. I thought control could replace connection. I was wrong. I hurt someone who reminded me what it meant to be human. The crowd fell silent. To Maya Tran, wherever you are, he continued, I am sorry. I never deserved the kindness you gave me, but I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of it. The next morning, every major news outlet carried his confession. The same media that once mocked him now called his words a redemption speech. But Ethan did not care about reputation anymore. He cared about finding her. With the help of his assistant, he traced the hospital records and found that her father had been transferred to a small clinic outside Houston. Ethan drove through the night, rain pouring across the highway like a curtain between past and future. When he arrived, dawn was breaking, soft and pale. Through the window of a modest flower shop beside the clinic, he saw her. Maya stood arranging a bouquet of white lilies, her face calm, her movements gentle. For a long moment, he simply watched. Then he stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed softly. Maya looked up, startled. Ethan, she whispered. How did you find me? You left me a clue, he said, holding up the old note. You told me to rebuild myself. I started by rebuilding the truth. She looked at him cautiously. And what truth is that? He took a slow breath. That I fell in love with you long before I understood what love really is. Tears welled in her eyes, but she shook her head. You cannot just say that after everything that happened. I know, he said gently. That is why I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for a chance to prove it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden keychain shaped like a lily. You once said houses should be filled with purpose, not perfection. I finished the old house. It is a community workshop now for people who need to rebuild their lives. He paused, his voice breaking. I named it after you. The Maya Project. For the first time, she smiled through her tears. You actually did it. I had to, he said softly. It was the only way to fix what I broke. Maya set down the flowers and took the keychain from his hand, her fingers brushing his. Outside, the sun climbed higher, lighting the lilies in the window until they glowed like forgiveness. And in that fragile light, for the first time since their deal began, nothing about them felt like a contract anymore. A month later, the grand opening of the Maya project filled the small town with light and laughter. The once forgotten house had been completely transformed. Its porch was rebuilt, the walls freshly painted, and the scent of lilies drifted through every open window. The sign above the door read, "Built from what was broken." People from the community gathered, carpenters, students, and families who had volunteered to help Ethan bring the project to life. Cameras were there too, but this time, he did not care about the attention. When Maya arrived, wearing a simple white dress, Ethan could not take his eyes off her. She looked around in awe. "You really turned it into something beautiful," she said softly. "You did that," he replied. "You gave me the reason." They stood together on the front steps as Ethan addressed the crowd. "This house once held my mistakes," he said, his voice calm but full of feeling. "Now it holds second chances. We built it for anyone who needs a place to start again." He glanced at Maya, and their eyes met. "Because sometimes," he continued, "love is not about promises we write down. It is about the ones we keep when no one is watching." The audience applauded, but Ethan barely heard them. When the event ended, he found Maya near the garden, kneeling beside a row of freshly planted lilies. "They will bloom by spring," she said. "They always do." "You never stopped believing in things that could grow again," he said quietly. "Maybe because I had to," she replied. "If I had not, I would have lost hope." Ethan took a deep breath. "I do not want to lose you again." Maya looked at him, her eyes searching his. "Ethan, what are we now?" He smiled faintly. "No contracts. No deadlines. Just us." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, simple and golden, without conditions. "The first time I asked you to marry me, it was for business," he said. "This time, it is for love." Her breath caught, tears filling her eyes. "You do not have to do this." "I want to," he said, his voice steady. "You showed me that some things are worth rebuilding, even when they take time." She smiled through her tears. "Then yes," she whispered. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and the crowd that had begun to gather clapped and cheered. But for them, the world had gone quiet. Later, as the sun dipped behind the trees, they stood hand in hand under the old porch light. The house glowed warmly behind them, filled with laughter and music. Ethan leaned closer and whispered, "You once said love builds people. You were right." Maya smiled. "And people build homes." The camera flash caught that moment, the once broken CEO and the woman who taught him how to love again. Their story had begun with a contract but ended with a promise, sealed not on paper, but in their hearts.